Namaste. I'm so happy today to have Umesh share his knowledge, given as an introduction to Vedic astrology. I welcome you, Umesh.
Thank you, Kaliji. Namaste. Before I start, a little bit about my background so that you know who I am. I was born and raised in India and in Bombay, and I came to this country about 35 years ago. I'm living in San Francisco right now. And my original background was in technology, and then I moved into management consulting. But then about 25 years ago or so, my spiritual journey started. So I had lots of questions about God and so on and so forth. And as part of that spiritual journey, I turned to astrology to help me understand some of those questions I had. And my original goal was to understand God a little bit better, but I knew that was a tall order for me, or actually I would say for anybody. But my approach was that I would begin to understand the planets a little bit better. Reason being because I considered the planets as instruments of God that have an impact in our lives. So if I could understand the planets a little bit better, then maybe I might be able to understand God a little bit better than what I know. So that was the first reason why I decided to turn to astrology. And then the second reason was to help people when they're going through a difficult time. So typically what happens, what I've seen is that, when we go through, and that's human nature, when we go through a good time, we feel like, oh, it's going to last forever, and it doesn't. And when we go through a difficult time and we feel like it's going to last forever, and actually it doesn't. So, and astrology helps us show us the kind of the timeline and the karmic blueprints. And so if you're able to understand that, okay, when is this difficult time going to get over, then it makes it helps people go through that difficult time a little bit better and gives them some more hope, so to speak. So those were the two reasons why I turned towards astrology. And then I continue studying. I've been studying for the last 25 years or so on my own mostly, and then with some teachers from India and US at every opportunity I get. But I do consider myself as a lifelong student of astrology because once you begin to know this, once you begin to see this, you understand that this is a vast, like, and a deep ocean. This science. It is actually, to give you an example, one of the Maharishis who started, where this originated from, Maharishi Parashara. He compared his own knowledge to standing in front of an ocean, and he was cupping some water in his hands, and he felt like the knowledge that he had was compared to the water in his hands compared to what is to be known out there. So so that is the thing. It's like, no matter how much a person studies, the person, I think, will always be a lifelong student of it. It's like the more you know, the less you know, and sometimes the less you know, you feel like the more you know. So just on that thing. So let's go ahead and so I usually start my sessions with these two mantras. And if you would like to join, please feel free to join. We will say the Ganesh mantra 3 times. Ganesh is the ruler of astrology, and he lords over all the planets. And then we say the Guru mantra 12 times, once for each sign of the zodiac. So if you'd like to join, please feel free. We can just close our eyes and say this mantra. These two. Okay, so you start. Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha. Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha. Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha. Om Gurave 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 Namaha. So here is what we're going to look at. The first thing is, how is Vedic astrology different from Western astrology? And there are some key and major differences that we will look at. And then we will start looking at the building blocks of Vedic astrology. So basically the signs, or it's called Rasis, the Sanskrit term. And these are the same signs that we may all might be familiar with because they're the same as the Western astrology, which is Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So those are the 12 signs. and what are some of those significations for those signs. Then the second block we will look at is the houses in a chart. And again, there are 12 houses, similar to 12 signs. But these houses, they represent different areas of our lives. And we will go that and look at that into more detail. Like, what does the first house represent? What does the second house represent? Third house, fourth house, and so on. And how do those houses map to the signs? Basically, there's a one-to-one mapping between the houses and the signs, but the starting point for in each chart is different. So for some people, Aries might be the first house. For some people, Gemini might be the first house. For some people, Libra. For some people, Pisces, and so on. So, but from then on, the mapping is the sequence is the same. We will look at that a little bit more. And then we look at the planets or the grahas. And over here, Vedic astrology uses 9 planets. Um, it's basically the 7 planets are, and the 2, and 1 is Rahu Ketu. So the 7 planets are the Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter. And then we have Rahu, which is the north node, and Ketu, which is the south node. So it does not use, Vedic astrology does not use the outer planets like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, even though the rishis basically knew about these and have made reference to them in their writings, in the scriptures. Um, they made reference to Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but decided not to use. And the reason was because these planets, these outer planets move very, very slowly. So their impact can be felt on generations, but may not as much on personal day-to-day lives. And again, the term grahas doesn't mean a planet. So there may be some astronomers who come and tell us, "Oh, you astrologers, you don't even know that sun and moon are not planets." Well, actually, the rishis knew about it, and that's why they use the word grahas. And grahas means something that seizes our mind. So they felt, rightfully so, that the planets seize our mind, and different planets seize our mind at different times in our lives. And we will see that in some of the techniques that we talked about. So then we look at, next one is planetary yogas. So we are all familiar with yoga. What this means, it means union. But what happens is when 2 or more planets come together and form a yoga. So how are their effects different? And how does that manifest in our lives? So that's the concept. Then we look at transits or gochara. So what this means is where the planets are right now compared to where they were when we were born. See, our natal chart is a snapshot of the heavens of where the planets are at the moment that we are born. However, the planets are in constant motion, just like everything else in the universe is. So the planets are transiting in different houses in our chart, and they create different effects. And these effects can be very powerful. So we will look at some of that. Then we look at Vimshotri Dasha, which is a very amazing predictive technique in Vedic astrology, different from this is something that's unique to Vedic astrology. There's nothing like that in Western astrology or any other astrologies. But this is something that the Maharishis have come up with, and it works beautifully. It works like a charm. So we will see a little bit of that. And then we look at the major chart representations. So how are we going to represent all this on a chart? And there are 2 main representations. One is used in North India, which is the North Indian system, and obviously the other one is in South India, the South Indian system. The information that is presented in both those representations is exactly the same. There's nothing more, nothing less in each of those. However, it's a completely different way of looking at it. And it's all a matter of personal preference. Some people feel one works for them better than the other. But what I've seen is once they latch on to one chart style, it's very difficult to move to another one. I've seen even astrologers who have been doing this for like 25, 30 years. If they're used to one system and you give them the chart in the other system, it's like they feel lost. And it goes both ways, from North Indian to South Indian and South Indian to North Indian. So it's just a matter of personal preference as to what you prefer. Then we will pull all this information together, and we'll look at a couple of examples. And I have a couple of charts that we will look at. Then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, although there may be some times along the presentation, because I understand this is a new topic for everybody, and there will be questions as we go along. So there may be some logical points in the presentation where we look at the questions that come up. Excuse me. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So what is Vedic astrology? Vedic astrology, as we know, is basically it's a practice in India for thousands of years. It originated in India itself, and the Sanskrit term is Jyotisha. Now, what does that Jyotisha mean? Jyoti means light. So this is the science of light. So we are putting light on our karmic blueprint, and we're putting light on the planets in our chart and understanding we're basically putting light on our lives. So you can think of that as well. And Vedic astrology is just a more recent Western term that has come up now. So its origins is in the Vedas, and it was dictated by the Maharishis, who basically, amazingly, could close their eyes and understand the deep and mysterious workings of the universe without any instruments. And they have come up with stuff that even till today, and we will see that some examples of that. Even with all the instruments that we have today, we are still not able to catch up to what the rishis had come up with. And we are, in some ways, we are using the wrong information. Like when we talk about the precession of the equinoxes, which is one of the main differences between Western and Vedic astrology as to the position of the planets itself. And we will look at that a little bit more. It is practiced in everyday life for thousands of years, including in marriage. So even now, in many parts of India, when an arranged marriage, especially in arranged marriages, the first step that the families do is to look at the charts of the boy and the girl. Even before the boy has met the girl has met the boy. Even before the families have met or whatever, the first thing that they will do is to look at the charts. If the charts match, then they take it to the next step. If not, then they put an end to it. Now, of course, this practice is changing quite a bit, especially in the cities where, because of Western influence, it is not as prevalent as it used to be. But in many parts of India, it still is. In fact, I still get people calling me from India, and as a first step is they have me look at the charts for their daughters and for their sons and so on. Also, we look at on the chart when opening a new business as to when is the right time to open a business, moving into a new home, and including naming a newborn. Like they name the babies. Again, this is mostly in the small towns. I don't think this is as much being practiced in the cities nowadays in India. But in the smaller towns, it depends on the position of the moon as to how they name the baby. And we will look at that example over here and what the advantages are of doing that. And it's quite interesting. So this is how we name a newborn. So basically, the astrologer looks at the moon sign of the baby when the baby is born, and if the baby is born in Aries, then he basically just gives the astrologer would give the first letter, which is A, L, or I, and then the parents can use that to give their baby any name they want with that letter. So if it's in Virgo, then it's P, Th, and N. Scorpio, the name would start with N or a Y, and so on. So now, an interesting advantage of this is that in the villages, when people would, where astrology is an integral part of day-to-day life, and they would go to an astrologer, and especially during the times when there were no computers and it was quite tedious to even create a chart because it was all manual calculations. So the astrologer would just ask the name of the person, and depending on the name, the astrologer would already know as to what areas of this person's life are positively impacted, what areas of the life person is going through challenges, and what's happening, and so on. And why? How would that astrologer know? Is because of the transits. So the transits are mostly looked at from the moon sign. However, the name gives us the moon sign. So the name is say the name was the moon was in Cancer. His or her name started with H. And let's say if Harry goes to an astrologer at that time, or even if today, if Harry comes to an astrologer today, the astrologer knows, assuming Harry had his name by the moon sign, that Harry's moon is in Cancer. And today, actually, the Saturn is in Capricorn, which is the seventh house, and seventh house from Cancer. And we will look at all this, but I'm just giving an example right now. So based on that, the astrologer would know that Harry will be going through some relationship problems. Now, Jupiter, and that's going to, it started like earlier this year, and it will go on for the next couple of years. Why? Because Saturn stays in a sign for around 2.5 years. And wherever Saturn goes, it basically tests that area. So if it's in the house of relationships, it will test all the different relationships the person has, not just romantic relationships, but all relationships across the board with their friends, with their family members, and their parents and brothers, sisters, everybody. And if the relationship is real, if it has a strong foundation, it will survive. If it's not, it will not survive. Because at the end of the transit, basically Saturn wants the truth. He wants things that are real. And if it survives, then it comes out much stronger than before too, because it has gone through all this test. So that is just and then the astrologer would also know, okay, here's the moon sign, here's Jupiter, and these areas of that person's life, the person will experience good luck because Jupiter is planet of good luck. It's almost like it's like a Santa Claus of the planets. Wherever it goes, it gives and gives in that area. And it's a very positive planet, very optimistic compared to other planets. So that is an example of naming a newborn. So it was so easy for the astrologers just by the name to know what's going on. And in fact, sometimes they would even know what the question is going to be before that person had a chance to ask the question because they already know what's going on in that person's life just by their name. Okay, so now that we know what's Vedic astrology, and how is Vedic astrology different from Western astrology? So there are three main differences that I wanted to highlight here. Now, the first and the big difference is this concept of sidereal zodiac versus tropical zodiac. And now let me tell you from the outset. Actually, I'll mention that when we come to it. However, I was going to say that this difference of sidereal zodiac versus tropical zodiac is a little bit tricky and a little bit difficult to understand because it involves some astronomy knowledge. So we will try to do our best to simplify as much as we can, but just know that that is a tricky concept to understand. The second difference between Vedic and Western is the concept of nakshatras, which are lunar mansions, which is there only in Vedic. It's not there in Western. And the third big difference is the concept of dashas, which is the predictive technique in Vedic, which is again, Western uses different predictive techniques like progressions and so on and so forth. But this concept of dashas is unique to Vedic astrology. So just to keep it simple, we will look at these three major differences, although there could be a little bit more, but these are the main ones. So let's look at the first one, which as I said, was the most difficult to understand. So I'll try to go through this step by step. Okay, it's basically based on this concept of precession of equinoxes. Now, what does that mean? I will actually show a video at the end of the slide which explains that concept. It's a 3-minute video, and I think it does a good job in making it simple. But just so we know, that Western astrology uses the tropical zodiac and Vedic uses the sidereal zodiac. There is a difference of about 24 degrees between the two zodiacs. And this difference is called the ayanamsa. It's basically the correction that needs to be applied to get from one zodiac to the other. So what are the implications of this? What does this mean, this difference of 24 degrees? The difference means that if you thought that your sun was in a particular sign, or actually any planet for that matter, in the Western chart, it actually might be that it is there are good chances that it's going to be in the previous sign and not in the sign that is shown by the Western chart. And that is because of the difference of 24 degrees. Now we will see why this difference has come about and what it means. Because this is not just a static 24 degrees. This 24 degrees will change over time. And the difference, the cause of the difference is basically it's because of the wobble of the Earth causing its axis to shift slightly compared to the North Star. So we know, there are three different motions, and now I'm switching a bit to astronomy. So there are three motions that the Earth has. Okay, so the first motion is the Earth goes around the sun roughly about 365 days a year, 365 and a quarter. And that gives us the different seasons, summer, winter, fall, and so on and so forth. The second motion is, that the Earth spins around its axis 24 hours a day, which gives us day and night. However, there's a third motion, which we will see in the video. And this is a very slight motion. It's very hard to even detect, and maybe that's why Western astrology doesn't use it. And it's a very, and the difference is very small. It's basically a difference of approximately 51 seconds every year, or 1 degree in 72 years. And what is that 1 degree in 72 years? It's basically the Earth where it's pointing north. Today it's pointing to Polaris, another North Star. It is shifting slightly by 1 degree every 72 years. Means over the course of our life, is shifting only 1 degree. Now, what's interesting is that our Maharishis in their ancient wisdom, they were able to detect this movement and incorporate that into Vedic astrology. So that's the reason Vedic astrology, the idea of the zodiac is different between the two. Now, the two zodiacs, they coincided around 285 AD. So this was, I think, in the time of Julius Caesar, and then the Caesar calendar and all. So at that time, it was the same. So say the sun was going into Aries on March 21st, and it was true for Vedic also. So the two charts would have been exactly the same. But then 72 years later, from 285, there was a difference of 1 degree between the two zodiacs. And 72 years later, there was a difference of 2 degrees. And 72 years later, there was a difference of 3 degrees, and so on. So now, about 1735 years later, from 285 again to 2020, there's a difference of about 24 degrees. So if in Western astrology, if your sun is in, and say if you're born between March 21st and April 15th, your sun is actually not in Aries as you might think, but it is in Pisces, the previous sign. But because, so basically how you have to, what you have to look at is to convert that is to take your Western chart and all the planets, not just sun, all the planets, and subtract 24 degrees from that. Now, there may be some instances where they will still remain in the same sign. And what are those instances? It is basically when the planets are more than 24 degrees in a sign. Then yes, then even if you subtract that, say if your planet is 27 degrees, it comes to 3 degrees, you subtract 24, and it still remains in the same sign. But however, for the most part, if they are from 0 to 24, they will go into the previous sign, including the ascendant or the first house, which we will look at. Okay. Now this date will keep moving. So today it's 24 degrees, roughly 24 degrees. But 72 years from now, it will be 25 degrees. And 72 years from now, it'll be 26 degrees. So today, Western astrology considers sun to go into Aries around March 21st, which has been the same. But Vedic astrology considers this to go around April 14th. But after 72 years, Vedic astrology will, the sun goes into Aries on April 5th, not on April 14th, but April 15th. And 72 years later, it'll go on April 16th. Now, again, after 26,000 years, the two zodiacs will coincide again. Why 26,000 years? Because we say it takes 72 years for 1 degree. So for 360 degrees, you multiply 360 by 72, you get roughly 26,000 years. So again, in 26,000 years, from 285 AD, the two zodiacs will coincide. So in case anybody's still around at that time. So we went through this, so it is possible that your sun is actually different than what it is. And it's not just the sun, it's basically all the planets. But Western astrology focuses more on sun, so, and we tend to look at it, our sun sign. So just know that your sun sign would be actually different if it's from 0 to 24 degrees in a sign. So the sidereal zodiac actually reflects where the planets actually are in the sky. Now, I did an interesting experiment. I went to the planetarium over here in Oakland, in the Bay Area, and I talked to some astronomers. And I didn't talk about anything about astrology or anything like Vedic or Western. I just asked them the exact position of where the planets were with the exact degrees on that particular day. And they coincided exactly with how it was in the Vedic system, in the sidereal zodiac, and not on the tropical zodiac. So this is an experiment that you can try on your own. Go to your local planetarium, either on your birthday or some other day, doesn't matter. But on your birthday, you will see that, you know, the planets, the sun and all, they could be different, especially if, as I mentioned, if it's less than 24 degrees. And if it's more than 24 degrees, it would be in the same sign too. So at this point, I know we're covering a lot of ground here, and actually, um, we will have a recording of this session up on the website. So it's possible you may have to look at the recording a few times to get all that. Just know that when I started studying astrology, it took me a while to start understanding all the different concepts and so on. So it takes a few times you got to revisit the information to understand it completely. But just to make it simpler, at this point, I would like to show this video, which is again 3 minutes long, which explains this topic of this precession of the equinoxes, and then hopefully it'll be clear. Okay.
Precession is the movement of the rotational axis of an object. It is commonly seen in toy tops, but all spinning objects can demonstrate precession. In astronomy, we are most interested in the precession of Earth. The orbital tilt obliquity of Earth is 23.5 degrees. Thus, the axis of Earth's rotation traces out a cone of half-angle 23.5 degrees in a period of roughly 26,000 years. This effect is often referred to as precession of the equinoxes. The technical details behind precession are beyond the physics covered in introductory astronomy, but they focus on the fact that Earth is not spherically symmetric but oblate, fatter around the middle, and the gravitational pulls of the Sun and Moon on this equatorial bulge cause precession. I will demonstrate precession with what is known as an air gyroscope. This particular model was manufactured by Ealing Corporation in 1956. We will observe precession on this 4-inch steel ball, and a pump will force air out a hole beneath the ball, supporting its weight and minimizing friction. Note that the ball has a rod attached so one can view the ball spinning. Part of the interior of the ball has been hollowed out to counterbalance the weight of the rod. I will turn on the air pressure and position a weight at a predetermined balanced position. Thus, the center of mass of the ball rod weight is over the center of the ball. When we spin up the ball, we see that it will spin stably for a long while in this balanced position. I now move the weight outward. The ball is no longer balanced, and it is more analogous to the oblate Earth. When I spin up the ball, we can now readily observe the slow change of the axis of rotation due to precession. Now remember that Earth's axis of rotation forms the basis for the celestial equatorial coordinate system. Thus, as the location of the vernal equinox and celestial poles change due to precession, the positions of stars in right ascension and declination also change. So although right now we have a fairly bright star in Polaris near the North Celestial Pole, that will no longer be true in about 1,000 years. Astronomical catalogs giving the positions of objects are typically updated every 50 or 100 years to the definition of the celestial equatorial system at that time, such as 1950 or 2000. And computer programs to process object coordinates to that system at the current time are ubiquitous. A telescope pointing system that doesn't take precession into account wouldn't be sufficiently accurate to be very useful. More teaching materials can be found on the web at astro.unl.edu.
So with that, let's continue on. So hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer, this topic, which, as I said, is not necessarily easy, not very easy to understand. But basically, it's the North Pole, where Earth is pointing north, is shifting, and that's why the relative position of the Earth compared to the constellations is also changing, and the change is very small, and it's 1 degree over 72 years. But when we step back over thousands of years, it is quite significant. All right, let's move on to the next major difference between Vedic and Western, is this concept of nakshatras or lunar mansions. So one might think is that, okay, when you look up at the sky, yes, there are those 7 planets on actually the other 2, Rahu and Ketu, are not planets per se, but positions in the zodiac, but they act like planets. But even for those 7 planets that are considered in Vedic astrology, when you look up at the sky, you see a lot more than 7 planets. You see all these stars and so on and so forth. So the question that would come to our mind is, why is it that the planets are affecting us and not the stars? Well, actually, the stars also do. And the rishis have taken that into account also. And what they did was they divided the zodiac into 27 nakshatras. So these are smaller divisions than the zodiac, which is 30 degrees. And this is each nakshatra is 13 degrees or 20 minutes each. Now, why 13 degrees and 20 minutes? Because it represents the distance that is traveled by the moon in one day. So that's why it's called a lunar mansion. Uh, the sun, it goes it, it goes over 1 degree in one day, but in one day the moon travels faster than that. The moon travels 13 degrees and 20, roughly around 13 degrees and 20 minutes, and so that's why that is given as a nakshatra. So these nakshatras have different qualities to it. They are more granular than the sun signs that we know. So each of the signs, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so on, will have about two and a third nakshatras each. Because if you take 13 degrees and divide it by 30 degrees, 20 minutes, so you'll get uh, more than two nakshatras in each sign. And these characteristics are quite different than the actual signs itself. Why? Because the rishis have taken into account the effects of the stars, the fixed stars, in that part of the zodiac. So we will see an example of that. Uh, like for example, the first nakshatra is Ashwini. It goes from 0 to 13 degrees in the sign of Aries. The deities are the Ashwini Kumara twins, who are uh, the celestial doctors, so to speak, celestial physicians. So now we will see what are the characteristics of a person who has either sun, moon, or even the first house in this constellation of Ashwini, in the nakshatra of Ashwini. So they will have healing abilities, especially they will be leaning more towards alternative healing. They like large animals like horses. There's something unique or noticeable about their face, nose, or teeth. They have respect for their elders. Their mother and father could be from different backgrounds, either from a social standpoint or from an economic standpoint or cultural standpoint. And they have a close relationship with a sibling or a friend who would appear just like a twin. It's like they're so close, they are just like twins. Now, the question I would ask is, does any of this reflect the sign of Aries? Would you have guessed that this person has Aries sun or Aries moon? Because it is Aries too. I mean, Ashwini is in Aries, but that's not what we would have thought. Aries, we associate that with passion, with aggression, and uh, rushing to action, kind of anger, and this and that. And of course, there are some good qualities also for Aries. For those of you in the audience, I don't want to. Aries has good qualities also because they are quick to make decisions and action, and they have some leadership qualities also. But the point here is this nakshatra of Ashwini and the qualities that that person has is so different than just the sign of Aries. And that is because of taking into account the effects of all the other planets, all the other stars that are there in that part of the zodiac. Now, also notice the similarities between the characteristics of that person as to the deities, the Ashwini Kumara twins. The Ashwini Kumara twins are pictured as on horses and who are the celestial physicians, right? So that's why the person who has Ashwini strong has healing abilities because the Ashwini Kumaras were the physicians. They were the ones who were treating the gods. They like large animals like horses. They have close relationship with a sibling or a friend because they are like twins because the Ashwini Kumaras are twins. So there will be this concept of twins will play out in that person's life more strongly than others. Okay? And of course, there are different nakshatras. After Ashwini, there's Bharani, there's Kritika, there's and so on and so forth. Rohini and so on, and all of them have different characteristics. Okay, so we saw this ideal zodiac, these tropical zodiac nakshatras, and then the dashas, which is a predictive technique used in Vedic astrology. It basically the concept of dashas is that there are cycles within cycles, there are sub-cycles and so on, but within a person's life, and each of the planets plays a more it's ruled these cycles are ruled by planets, so to speak. So the major cycle is ruled by one planet, and it means something, and if it's ruled by another planet, it means something else, and we will look at that. But this, I would tell you, is a very, very powerful technique, and I've seen from my own practice where when one dasha starts and the other dasha ends, it's like the person takes on a completely different flavor. They actually take on the flavor of that planet. And even though it's the same person, when they go, say, from Moon to Mars, and Moon Dasha, they are, very home loving, they're emotional, they're sensitive, and this and that, and all that stuff, reflecting the qualities of the moon. But when they come in, as soon as they come into Mars, it's totally different. It's like, they are more aggressive, they tend to get angry easily, and they're more accident prone, and so on. And if they come into Jupiter Dasha, then it's completely different, where the person turns towards more spirituality, more wisdom, more knowledge. Person wants to help other people, and so on. So even though it's the same person, but at different times in their lives, they take on a different flavor, so to speak, and they're taking on the flavor of the planet. And the good news is, in Vedic astrology, we can chart out that person's timeline right from the start to all for past, present, and future. So this way, at least, when a person is aware of the changes that they are going to go through, because remember we talked about grahas seizing the mind, inevitably those changes are going to happen. The changes will happen on the outside as well as on the inside. But at least if that person has that awareness, then that person is better prepared for that and better able to navigate that as well. So as we said, it gives results according to the nature of the planet. Not just the nature of the planet, there are other factors involved also. It's the position in the chart, where the planet is in the chart. Also, what other planets are aspecting that particular planet, whose dasha we are going through. So a lot of different things come into play. And again, there are cycles within sub-cycles, because as we see, some of the dashas can be fairly long, like 20 years or 10 years or 16 years. But then each of those dashas are broken down into cycles and sub-cycles to a smaller scale, and you can actually see the effects happening at the smaller levels too. So there are, again, different types of dashas, but the most popular one is the Vimshotri dasha that is used, and that's the one that I use. And it is basically, if you look at the whole span of all the planets, and different planets have different years assigned to them. So it comes down to a total span of 120 years. So interesting enough, it seems like the rishis thought that a normal human lifespan should be around 120 years. Okay, so that was the main differences between Vedic astrology and Western astrology. It was the precession of the equinoxes, it was the nakshatras, it was the dashas. So now we are going to look at the building blocks of Vedic astrology. And before we do that, this might be a point where we can pause for some questions and to see if there are any questions. The way to find the moon sign, and actually the sign of all the planets, is to basically have your chart done, a Vedic astrology chart done. Now, if you have some knowledge of it, you could go to some internet websites, and there may be some sites which might be able to create a free chart for you. But typically, you would go to a Vedic astrologer. The astrologer would create a chart, and you would know not only the position of your moon sign, but of all the other planets as well. Actually, the zodiac sign is just a zodiac sign. It is like a place in the zodiac. It's a location in the zodiac. Now, some people may have their sun there, some people may have their moon there, some people may have Mars in a particular sign. And so we'll see that. So it's not, we don't say that our sun zodiac sign is a place where the sun is. The sun happens to be in that particular sign. The moon happens to be in that particular sign, but that zodiac sign is still there. And it will basically, when you look at your chart, that zodiac sign will represent a particular house in your chart, regardless of whether the planets are there or not. Let's look at the fundamental building blocks of Vedic astrology, and maybe this will also refer to some of the question about zodiac and sun sign and so on, because this is where we're going to look at the 12 signs, or rashis, as the Sanskrit term is. And again, These signs are the same as in Western astrology. It's Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So these are all zodiac signs. Okay, so it is not where our sun is, but these are all zodiac signs. Now the sun may happen to be, the sun will be in one of those signs, but the moon will be in another of those signs. See, one of the key differences also, I think it's good to point out, is Western astrology is more focused on the sun sign, but Vedic astrology is focused more on the moon, because the moon is what rules our mind. It rules our emotions and so on. So and how we perceive the world is through our mind and our five senses and so on. The sun represents the soul, and it is an important planet for all of us. But the moon is how we perceive the mind and how the experience of the world is. So the moon sign is actually given more importance than the sun sign. And that's the reason why, if you remember, when I was talking about naming the newborn baby, the astrologer, it was the moon sign that kind of influenced as to what name was given to the baby. It wasn't the sun sign, because again, the transits were also looked at from the moon. Although the transits are also looked at from the ascendant, and these terms will make sense as as people study astrology more. But I'm just throwing it out there, but just so that you know a little bit. And some people who may have been knowing astrology will probably be able to understand all this. But just to know that the moon sign is more important than sun sign in Vedic. Then we look at the 12 houses or the bhavas. Again, there are 12 houses, and we will see what each of these houses signify. Basically, our different areas of our lives are represented in these houses. We look at the 9 planets or the Grahas. Again, the Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu. Those are the 9 planets that Vedic astrology uses, and we talked a little bit about not using outer planets. We will look at planetary yogas, or the union of planets. Okay. What are the combinations that create? Basically, we will look at 2 main yogas, actually 3. One is, what are the combinations that create wealth in a person's chart? Because when some particular planets come together in a person's chart, it brings wealth to them. It's much easier for them to make money. We will look at the combinations which bring fame, status, authority. It's like the Raja Yogas, which do that. And what constitutes a Raja Yoga? What constitutes a Dhana Yoga, or wealth-producing yoga? And then basically another example of yoga. We will look at the concept of transits, which we've already touched upon a little bit. We will look at Vimshotri Dasha, that I've already talked about. And we will actually look at the actual representations the chart represent, the North Indian, South Indian, and what are the differences. And you can figure out for yourself as to which one you like better. So it'll be interesting. Okay. So here are the different signs, the different zodiac signs: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and so on, and what they signify. So if a person has strong Aries, then Aries signifies aggression, enthusiasm. They're energetic. They have inspired, the courage. It's basically a fire sign, and it is ruled by Mars. So if you combine those things together, you come up with these qualities. On the other hand, Taurus is an earth sign ruled by Venus. So the Taurus people, they like love, romance, luxury, comforts, all these Venusian kind of things, jewelry, clothing. It's a good sign for wealth because it's earth sign as well as a Venus sign. Gemini people, on the other hand, it is an air sign, and it is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is all about communications. So, and intelligence. Mercury, the name for Mercury in Sanskrit is Buddhi. Buddhi is our mind. So our intellect. Manas is the mind. Manas is actually ruled by Moon. But Buddhi, which is our intellect and our intelligence, is ruled by Mercury. So these people they can be intelligent. They have an active mind. They're quick learners and so on. Cancer is a water sign ruled by the Moon. So a water sign is basically more about emotions. So they tend to be very emotional people. They'll remember things right from childhood. They have all these deep memories. They have. It's like they never forget anything. But they are more about home, their comforts. They're very sensitive also. So the Leo again is a fire sign. So it goes like fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water. So those are the so the Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius will be fire signs. Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn will be the earth signs. Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius will be the air signs. And Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces are the water signs. So the Aries, the fire signs are basically, as I said, more about action oriented, and they're courageous and so on. And the earth signs, more they're more rigid. They like more stability. Yeah. So, and the air signs are more about communications, about the mind and active minds and so on. And water signs are more emotional signs. So, so this will continue. So Leo basically is ruled by fire and sun. So that's why the sun is the king of the zodiac. So it's this person who has strong Leo has strong leadership qualities. They like to be in the spotlight. They enjoy the attention, and they are like kind of born leaders too. So they like to be in high positions and authority figures. Virgo is an earth sign ruled by Mercury again. So it's more about being responsible, about working hard, and they are very good at putting organization structure together. So they want everything well organized, and that's the strong Mercury coming into play. See, because now look at the difference, Virgo and Gemini. So Gemini is also ruled by Mercury. Virgo is also ruled by Mercury. However, Gemini is an air sign and Virgo is an earth sign. So that's why the Gemini people are more in their minds, kind of active mind, quick learners. It's a dual sign too. So they like having more than one of anything. So more than one career, more than one relationship, maybe, and more than one because that's how they get their intellectual stimulation. Because otherwise, if they're just doing one thing, they get bored because they're so such an active mind and quick learners, and then they could get bored easily, and they want to move on to something else. But Virgo, on the other hand, is an earth sign, so there's more stability there, and the stability goes into like putting organization and structure in everything, in their home, in their office, in their work, and so on. Okay. So Libra again is an air sign and ruled by Venus. So over here for them, balance is important. Love, relationships, beauty, and they tend to be very diplomatic people. So Libra people are the ones who are typically people, if they have conflicts, they come to the Libra person to kind of resolve the conflicts for them. So because their diplomacy, that they are able to do that. And Libra people, they want balance. They tend to move away from conflict and so on. Scorpio is a water sign ruled by Mars. So again, because of the Mars, there's passion, there's energy, there's aggressiveness. But because it's a water sign, they tend to have deep emotions, and they are deep thinkers too. So the classic example for Scorpio is, you see a duck that is very calm and peaceful on the surface on a lake, but under the surface, the duck is pedaling really hard just to be that. So that's a typical thing of a Scorpio, where deep inside they have lots of emotions going on, but on the surface they're really calm and so on. And yeah. So next is Sagittarius. Again, it's a fire sign ruled by Jupiter. Because of the Jupiter sign, it's they represents knowledge, optimism, growth, and Jupiter is a teacher. Jupiter is a guru. So they like teaching in some way or the other. They don't necessarily have to become teachers, but they like to guide people too, and they like to travel too because it's a ninth house of the zodiac, and ninth house represents other countries and so on. Capricorn and Aquarius, they are both ruled by Saturn. And Saturn is hardworking, responsible, traditional, dependable. Again, Capricorn is an earth sign. Aquarius is an air sign ruled by Saturn. So they love providing service. They're independent, and they're out of the box thinkers too, because of the air quality coming into that. But they are doing that in service of other people, and that's where the Saturn quality comes. Pisces is a water sign, so it'll be emotional. It'll be a soft, again, and it's also ruled by Jupiter, so it's a soft, creative, emotional sign. They have strong intuition and they love spiritual things because it represents, it's the 12th, it's the last sign of the zodiac. If you look at it from Aries first, so 12th house is about spirituality, and we'll look at what the houses mean. I know we have not talked about the houses yet, but you will see that the 12th house represents spirituality and so on. Okay, so those were the different signs and the rashis, the 12 signs. Now we look at the 12 houses, okay, and what they mean. So we go from the first to the 12th house, and the first house represents us, our body, our personality, our physical appearance, our health, our vitality. So it represents us per se. You know, it's a very important house, and that's the reason it is a very important house amongst all the 12 houses. So it kind of sets the foundation of the chart. Wherever the first house lord goes, that's where our focus tends to be in our life. You know, if it goes, yeah, okay. So the second house represents it's about money. Now each of these houses you can see represents more than one thing because there are so many things in our life, and pretty much the houses cover everything in our lives. But the rishis have given it to assign these different areas to the different, and they work really well. So the second house represents money. It represents our family, and this is the family that we grew up with in our early childhood. It represents our speech, it represents our food, and so on. The kind of food, depending, so which planet goes there is kind of food that we would like to eat, like whether we eat like spicy food or sweet food and so on. The third house is about our siblings. It's about our communications. It's about the courage we have and short distance travels. Fourth house represents a mother, our mother. House represents our overall happiness. Also, any cars or vehicles are represented by fourth house. So when Jupiter, as I said, when Jupiter is like the Santa Claus, when it goes through your fourth house in transit, it is likely that you will either be a few things. You know, your relationship with your mom will improve. You may do something in your house, some house improvements. You may buy a new car or something, or change a new car to a better car. So all those things, because Jupiter is transiting in your fourth house in transit. Now, fifth house represents our children, our intelligence, our romance, any romantic relationships, our creativity, creative pursuits. Sixth house represents illness, disease, health, disputes, litigation, enemies. So as we can see, it's not necessarily a positive house. And once I go through those houses, we will come back and visit like which houses are what, basically, which houses are more positive than others. And sixth house is one of them. Basically, sixth, eighth, and 12th are not that positive, but there are other houses that are more positive than that. Seventh house represents marriage, spouse, and partnerships of all kinds. So even if you're doing like business partnerships, it would be represented in the seventh house. And seventh house is basically other people. So first house is us, and right across first house is the seventh house, which is others. Eighth house represents transformations, sudden ups and downs. Also represents any inheritances that you may or may not get. Also, this thing about astrology is in the eighth house. So if your ruler of your first house, your Lagna Lord, remember I said wherever it goes, that's where we would tend to focus more on, is if it goes into the eighth house, then the person has a deep interest in astrology. Yeah. And they can be good at it also. But it comes, there are pros and cons with it, but then it also comes with lots of ups and downs in life and so on. But those ups can be, it could go both ways. It's not necessarily this thing, but change can be hard. Transformation can be hard. So that's why the eighth house is not considered that positive. The ninth house, on the other hand, is the house of good luck. It is a very positive house. It also represents the father, the higher knowledge, long distance travels, and as I said, luck and fortune. So wherever the ninth lord goes, whichever house it goes into, because the ninth lord can go into, is a planet, is ruled by a planet. So if your ninth lord was, say Leo, so in that case, Sun is the ruler of Leo. So your ninth lord will be sun. Now, your sun can be in of any of those houses. It doesn't have to be in the ninth lord. It just rules that. But your sun can be in Aries. So in that case, it'll be in a different house. Okay. So wherever the ninth lord goes, you will see it creates good luck for that person. Just like wherever the eighth lord goes, it creates difficulty for that person. And the ninth lord is the planet of good luck and fortune. The 10th lord is our career, profession, recognition. It also represents the government. It's an important house. The 11th lord is different than 11th house. Again, 11th lord is the planet that is ruling that sign that is represented by the 11th house. So they're two different things. So the 11th house indicates your friendships, your community activities, and also the house of gains. So it almost seems like any planet that goes there gets multiplied. And it's a very positive house. So when we look at the dana yogas or the wealth yogas, the 11th house becomes very, very important. So it's the second house, the 11th, the ninth house, and the 11th house. The combination of those planets creates a dana yoga. And that creates a very powerful dana yoga. Now, it could be that, because the second house represents money, the ninth house represents good luck and fortune, and the 11th house is house of gains. So you will find this in very rare cases. And we were going to look at the chart of Jeff Bezos, the richest person on the planet, who has that combination in his chart. And that's why he's the richest person on the planet, because it's a very rare yoga, the second, ninth, and 11th coming together. Okay. Of course, there are other, that's not the only dana yogas, there are other yogas, but we will look at that. Like, for example, the first and the fifth, if they're together, that also creates a dana yoga and so on. But they're different strengths of yogas, they're different levels. And so we will look at that. And lastly, the 12th house is, as I said, it represents losses. But however, it is good for spirituality and moksha. So it may represent losses on the material side, but it is actually a huge plus on the spiritual side. So it's almost like a seesaw. What's good on the material side, people who are more into the material side, they don't spend as much time on the spiritual side, and more people who are more on the spiritual side are not as interested on the material side. So it is like one or the other. But again, there's no judgment there. It's not like one is better than the other or so. It's all part of God's stories. So the way to approach astrology is, when you also look at your chart, is to not do it with any judgment. If you take a step back and you see that, and I'm just saying this for your own benefit, and once you start looking at it out, and then you say, oh, this is not good, and then that stays in our mind. No, there's nothing that is not all good, and there's nothing that's not all bad. So there are pluses and minuses on every side of it. But the point that I want to make is that, this whole creation actually we're told, was created by, when God was by himself. Right? God says, I am one, I desire to be many. And so we are the many. And our stories are God's stories. So there's no point in approaching any of these stories through our judgment, which comes through our mind. So everything is good and bad. Everything has its pluses and minuses. It all depends on our perspective. So those are those 12 houses. Now, just to say a little bit briefly, and then we'll take some questions if there are any questions. But the houses 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th, these are the quadrants. Okay, 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th. And these are called as the Vishnu sthanas. These are basically where Vishnu is in our horoscope. And why is that? Because Vishnu is what is Vishnu about? It's all about sustenance. So if you look at what these houses are, the first house is us, basically, our body, this thing. 4th house is our house, our vehicles. 7th house is our marriage, our partnerships. 10th house is our career, profession, and so on. All things that are essential for our day-to-day sustenance. Or that I wouldn't say essential, I would say important for our day-to-day sustenance. Okay, because a person can not be married and doing fine and happy and so on. So it's not like it is essential, but it is. But in that case, any kind of, again, the 7th house is partnerships of any kind. It doesn't have to be necessarily marriage. It could be doing business with anybody also. And after all, a person has to go out and make a living, so they have to deal with other people. So that's where the 7th house comes into play. 10th house is our career. So this is all about sustenance. Now, the first, the fifth, and the ninth houses, these are the trines of that. That's the Lakshmi Sthanas. That's where Lakshmi is supposed to be in our horoscope. It brings the blessing. So these are all good houses. Actually, the quadrants also and the trines, they represent our abilities too, that we are, like some people have natural abilities and all. So that's where we look at those houses from. And the fifth house, I've not mentioned over here, but it's also the house of Purva Punya, which is things that are coming to us from a past life. The good things that are coming to us, the merits of our past life, is represented by the fifth house. And the ninth house, as we said, is the planet of the house of luck and fortune. So that's Lakshmi and all. So we will see in the yogas when the ruler of a quadrant, which is a Vishnu Sthan, combines with the ruler of a trine, which is a Lakshmi Sthan, that is what creates a Raja Yoga, or that is a yoga for fame, status, authority, and so on. Okay. So but that combination is good. And if the person has more than one combination, it becomes even stronger. So that's why the person can become even more famous, and so on. So we talked about the quadrants, we talked about the trines. Now, third, sixth, and 11th house, these are called Upachaya houses, which means the houses that grow over time. So areas, if those planets are there, those houses, the areas of those houses will grow over time. And then we said about 6th, 8th, and 12th, which are kind of difficult houses from the material standpoint. But again, 8, they can make a person more spiritual. If you remember, you talked about being them 8th and 12th being water signs and more about moksha and spirituality and so on. So they have their pluses too, just a different kind of pluses. Okay. All right, so we looked at the signs and the houses. Okay, now how do the houses map to the signs? We have 12 houses, we have 12 signs. How do they map? Is it always that the first house is Aries and the second house is Taurus, like we looked over here? No, that all is different from person to person. It all depends on their particular birth chart. And it all depends on the date they were born, the time they were born, and the place they were born. Those are the three things, the variables that make one person's chart different from another. So for example, a person can be born on the same day at the same time, but if they're born at different places, they will have different charts. Their first house will be different. One person may have first house of Virgo, the other person may have first house of Capricorn. Okay? And then from then on, their houses will be the same. I mean, not the same, but the sequence will flow. So in the case of Virgo, the second house will be, just to make it clear for you guys. So if Virgo is the first house for a person, then the second house will be Libra, the third house will be Scorpio, the fourth house will be Sagittarius, fifth house Capricorn, sixth Aquarius, seventh Pisces, eighth will be Aries, ninth will be Taurus, 10th house will be Gemini, 11th house will be Cancer, and 12th house will be Leo. Say if a person has Cancer as their first house, so then the sequence will go from there. Cancer becomes the first house, Leo becomes the second, Virgo becomes the third, and so on and so forth. And Gemini becomes the 12th house. So it flows in the same sequence, but the starting point for the houses will be different for different people. I hope that's clear. Okay, let's pause here and let's take any questions if there are any questions. I wish I knew. I have no idea as to how the rishis were able to get that knowledge and how they were tuned into a different time, and it was probably during, I don't know. I would not even guess as to how they were able to get that knowledge. So your guess is as good as mine. But it seems like they were able to close their eyes and understand the mysterious and deep workings of the universe at a very, very deep and fundamental level. And so maybe because of their meditations and they were closer to nature at that time. And we were not at that stage of Kali Yuga at that time as we are right now. So right now it's our mind is scattered with all this technology and this and that. Our focus is more on the outside. In their case, their focus was more on the inside. And actually, if you go deep inside you will get a lot. You yourself will get a lot more answers too. I would say. Well, we don't get all the answers, but you will get a lot of answers. So that's why even meditation, I would say, is a key, and meditation is important amongst other things. And they were meditating a lot, and also it was their past life karma too, which which helped them to be in that place where they could understand all the mysterious workings of the universe. Yes, the answer is yes. It is very important in Vedic astrology also, because as I said, it sets the foundation for the horoscope. And if the ascendant is going in a good sign, it makes life things easier, and the health and the vitality of the person is also seen from the ascendant and where the ascendant lord is placed. So brief answer is absolutely yes. It's equally important in that. Well, the time of birth is very important because you will see that the calculations that are based on the birth time. Now, just to give an example, in my case, when I looked at my chart, my birth certificate said 3:15 p.m. in the afternoon, okay, on a particular day. But based on my life events, I was able to rectify that to 3:15 and 15 seconds. So you'll see the importance of the birth time. So that birth time, it is the murta of our life. It is when our life begins. It's yes, the soul is there and even before we were born and so on. But the experience of our life begins at the moment of our birth. And that is a snapshot of the heavens, and that's the chart we look at. So the birth time is extremely important especially in Vedic astrology. No, I think that's a very important question, and it's a good question, and that I think is the value of Vedic astrology. So because we are able to make sense of things in our lives that we otherwise would not have answers for. So that is one thing. And the second thing is, once we know that, okay, this is what's coming down in the future, so we are better prepared for it. And if I would say so, like, if challenging things happen to us, without this knowledge, without this awareness, and Vedic astrology brings us awareness to all this thing. Without that awareness, we tend to find blames either with ourselves or with others. But if something is meant to happen, and if somebody tells you that this is to be prepared for it, so then does that really make any sense to either blame ourselves or blame others? No, it was part of the karmic blueprint that actually our soul signed up for when it was at a place of higher wisdom, because it felt, or it considered that these are the experiences that the soul needs to go through for its higher growth. So and Vedic astrology shows us that karmic blueprint. And the dashas tell us different things, the transits tell us different things. So now, not to say that it's all scripted out, it's all destiny. There's also free will involved too, and that goes to another topic of free will versus destiny, but which is another topic. But we all have free wills, and we all have destiny. But there are things that are going to be destined no matter what. And if you know that beforehand, it becomes easier not only on you, but also on the people around you, I would think. So the answer is yes and yes. And the rising sign is the same as the first house that we were talking about, as the ascendant. So the ascendant is the rising sign. Basically, the rising sign is the sign that is rising on the eastern horizon at that time. And it could be, so there would be a particular sign that's rising on the eastern horizon. Say if it's Sagittarius. So Sagittarius becomes your first house. So it's very important. As you can see, that is what becomes the first house in the chart. But there would be a rising sign right now. There would be a particular sign that is rising right now. So once you start keeping track, and once we get into this more and more, you will be able to keep track of which sign is rising at what time, and which sign is rising right now, and which sign is going to rise later, and so on. And maybe be able to notice some differences, or bring your awareness to those differences, whether it's a fire sign, earth sign, water sign, and so on. And not only that, what planets are in that particular rising sign, so they have a flavor of their own also. So this is the deep connection that we build with nature that unfortunately we have lost over time, all of us, because of various reasons, because our attention has been more on the outside, on more on material stuff and so on. So, and this is going back to nature and building our stronger and deeper spiritual connection and connection with the planets, connection with spirituality and so on. So, which we can start any time actually. Now would be a good time too, if anybody's interested. There are techniques called rectification techniques, basically, that in fact I did one for a person also, but it takes a long time. It takes a few hours, and what we do is basically we look at all your major life events. There are lots of questions and so on that that an astrologer would ask you and so on, and basically work yourself backwards from those events is to figure out, narrow down the birth time more and more. So uh, so that's the thing, because your birth chart and your birth time has an influence over what events a person will have over the course of their life, right? So when they'll get married, when they'll go through particular life events and so on and so forth. And the thing is to work ourselves. We took this life events that have already happened and kind of fine tune ourselves and work ourselves backwards uh, to the birth time. Now, it is not an easy process because, again, the concept of free will also comes into place. It's not everything is there in the birth chart, obviously. There are, we all may have experience where we exercise our free will. So, as we move on in life, a set of choices opens up for us, okay, at every stage. It's kind of a very dynamic way of this. So, and we sometimes, because of through our free will or sometimes through our destiny, we pick one choice, whatever choice that is. Say if 10 choices are, we pick choice number 5. Now, choice 5, once we do that, another set of choices will open to us either at that time or in the future based on what we picked, right? If we had picked a different choice, we had to pick choice number 7, maybe the choices would have been different. And part of it is destiny, part of it is free will. So these choices that we go through, we have an experience of our life based on the choices and based on destiny. And actually, it could be infinite data points, infinite kinds of things. And what we are doing is using those experiences and working our way backwards to one particular birth time. So it can be done. It's not an easy process, but it can be done. But it takes a few hours to do it, basically. The next is we looked at the houses, we looked at the signs, and then look at the planets. And I kind of like this graphic because I felt like each of those keywords, they represent what the theme of the planet is. Even though in this case, we have the outer planets too, and we don't have Rahu and Ketu, but that's okay. But I just felt that it still was a good graphic to have. So the sun represents our sense of self-confidence, our sense of self-esteem. So it's basically I am, Our moon represents our emotions, our feelings, and so on. And that's why it says I feel. Mercury is about our intellect, our communications. So it says I think. Mars is about action. So I act. Venus is about love, relationships, and so on. So it's I love. Jupiter is about growth, knowledge, optimism, and so on. So it says I grow. Saturn is about hard work, discipline, our limitations. It says I achieve. And Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, even though they're outer planets, Uranus is like, is some of the attributes are that it's unpredictable, it's unconventional, it has sudden changes. So it basically says I evolve. Neptune is about illusions and confusion, and can also be a creative planet because it's a higher octave of Venus. So it says I dream. And Pluto is about death, transformation, birth, and so on. So it says, because of the transformation, it says I empower. Now, over here, I put some of my own stuff over here too. So sun is the soul, identity, self-confidence, self-esteem. Moon is emotions, mind, mother. Because it's our emotions, it also represents happiness. Mars is action, anger, courage. Venus is love, relationships, romance, and so on. Fashion. People who are more into Venus, are more, they like fashion, and they like to look good, and jewelry, and they spend a lot of time on the appearances also. Mercury is about communications, the buddhi, the speech, the writing abilities. Jupiter, as we said, is knowledge, wisdom, spirituality. Saturn is obstacles, inner growth, hard work, discipline. And these two, Rahu and Ketu. So Rahu is the north node. So Rahu is a very unconventional planet. It doesn't like to be conventional. It likes to be different. The Rahu period is associated with sudden changes in the life. It's almost, the word to describe Rahu is roller coaster. You just have to let go and let things happen in that period, because they will happen outside of your control, and things will happen suddenly too. But it's not necessarily bad. It could be good things. Good things also happen suddenly too. And Rahu is the planet of illusions, basically. It's a planet of Maya. Its main purpose is to pull you towards Maya, pull you towards the world. And how it does that? Sometimes it does that by giving you lots of money and lots of fame and so on, because once it does that, you're trapped in Maya. It's hard for you to think about God and other spiritual stuff when you're given so much fame, money, and so on and so forth. So some of the biggest rises in life, and we will see some example of that, happens not in the Jupiter period, but in the Rahu period, because it's all about an illusion that it's creating. And also, a person, it's all about obsessions too and desires. The person, it's like never enough. No matter how much they have, it's never enough. They want more and more and more. That is signified by Rahu. Ketu, on the other hand, is just the opposite. So Rahu and Ketu, Rahu is the head, Ketu is the body. There's actually an interesting story behind how that came to be. And maybe I'll take a few minutes and share that story, because it will add some more light on what Rahu and Ketu are and its relationship to other planets. But Ketu is about disappointments, detachments, separation. And why does that? Because its main goal is to move you towards spirituality. So in the Ketu period, you tend to start losing things, material possessions. It could be relationships also, or what. Unless you're already in a relationship which is already spiritual, so then you actually experience even more growth together, because the main purpose of Ketu is to move you towards spirituality. Rahu is to move you towards the world. Again, no judgment there, but just that is what it is. So the story of Rahu and Ketu, it's I'll just take a few minutes briefly. Is I don't know how many of you must be familiar. So there was in the mythology where the gods, basically, they were not immortal, and they used to enjoy all this, whatever the heavenly pleasures and so on and so forth. But then it would come to an end, and they did not like that deal. So they basically went and asked for, okay, we want to become immortal, and then they were told that that they have to churn this particular ocean, and that ocean, when they churn that ocean, there will be a nectar of immortality that comes up after a while. So they said, fine. They go, and all the gods get together, and then they go and start churning, but they're not getting anywhere. Then the demons basically find out. So this is God and the demons, there are two sides of it. So the demons find out what the gods are up to. And the demons don't like that. Then they said, oh, we also want to be immortal. So they go and they talk to the gods. And the gods realize, okay, we are not getting anywhere on our own. So then they have an agreement with the demons saying, whatever comes out, we will share with you. We will share the nectar of immortality, and let's do it together. So that's what they did. The gods and the demons start churning this ocean through. They have a big mountain, and then they're churning the ocean. And I'm just condensing the story. And then all these, at first, all these poisons start coming out. And these poisons are so toxic that they could basically destroy all of creation. So they have an interesting problem. So then they go to Shiva and they say, oh, these poisons are coming. What can we do? So then Shiva says, okay, don't worry. Shiva takes it on himself to consume all the poisons. And he consumes the poisons, and he stops it at his throat. And that's why his throat becomes blue. And that's why he has the term Nilakanta, which is the blue-throated god. So then after the poisons are taken care of, then actually the nectar of immortality comes. And then Vishnu comes to give the nectar of immortality to all the different gods. So the gods stand up in one line and the demons are in the other line. And Vishnu starts giving the nectar to all the gods. Now, soon the demons realize that maybe this is a ploy by the gods. The nectar is going to be complete once it's given to all the gods, and the demons will not have any. So what happens is one particular demon disguises himself as a god and comes and stands in the line between the sun and the moon, disguised as a god. And Vishnu goes on he hands it to the sun, then he hands it to the demon who he thought was a god, and then he moves on to the moon. But then the sun and the moon realize that, oh, this is not a god, this is a demon. And then they tell Vishnu that this is a demon, and we got all tricked. And Vishnu gets angry, and he takes out his Sudarshan chakra and he splits the body of the demon. Now, however, the demon had already taken the nectar of immortality. So that means the demon was immortal at that point already. So what happened? So the demon's body gets split into two. The head becomes Rahu, and the body becomes Ketu. Now, two implications of that. One is, the Rahu, that's why it's more about desires, about obsessions, because this demon was so obsessed about getting this thing. So that is one thing. And Ketu, basically, it is about spirituality. So what happens is when you come in the Rahu phase, the desires increase, the obsessions increase, you turn towards the world and all. But in the Ketu phase, Ketu is headless. So it has no direction. So we tend to do actions that would be perceived as headless and without any direction. So that is one thing. It plays itself out during the dashas or the periods of those planets, because we take on the characteristics of those planets. Now, the other implication of that, remember in the story, it was the sun and the moon which identified the demon. So that demon became almost like a permanent enemy of the sun and the moon, and always wants to take revenge. So that is why when Rahu and Ketu are together with sun and moon in a person's chart, it tends to create difficulty, from a emotional standpoint and so on, because this demon, and that's what an eclipse is. An eclipse is when Rahu and Ketu are together with the sun and the moon. It is basically the revenge of that demon eclipsing the sun and the moon because of what happened in that story. So see how these stories, the mythology that plays itself out beautifully in not only in astrology, but also in our day-to-day life and in our charts. Okay. So those were the planets. Now let's look at yogas, planetary yogas. This is basically, we know yoga is a union. A yoga would be when two or more planets come together. And it's like, mixing two different colors. So the resulting color that comes out could be entirely different than those two colors that we took. Like if I think I will later on the example, like if we put red and blue together, we get violet. If we get yellow and red together, we get orange, which is completely different from yellow, different from red. If we take blue and yellow together, we get green, which is different. So the resulting effect could be quite different than those two planets that are forming the yoga. Okay. So as we said, we'll take there could be many different kinds of yogas, but we will just, for the sake of time, we will just look at the Dana yogas, like how do we identify wealth in a person's chart, or Raja yogas, which gives us fame, status, authority, and so on, and an example of just another yoga. So again, these yogas would have different strengths. It all depends on the planets that are forming the yoga. It also depends on which house the yoga is being formed, whether it's a good house or it's a difficult house. Obviously, it will change the yoga itself, the flavor of the yoga. And it also depends on which other planets are aspecting those planets creating the yoga. Okay. So Dana yogas. This is the wealth-producing yoga, formed when rulers of the 1st, 2nd, 5th, 9th, and 11th houses are combined together, are connected together. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be all planets have to come together, because that would be an extremely, extremely rare occurrence. But even if any two planets come together, like the 2nd and the 5th and the 11th, the 1st and the 5th, they are Dana yogas. Now, I have put into bold 2nd, 9th, and 11th. Why is that? Because these yogas produce these houses produce yogas of a really much stronger quality. So being wealthy is relative, okay? But when the second, ninth, and 11th come together, or the second and ninth and 11th, it creates wealth of a different kind of a scale. Okay, if the first and the second are together, yes, the person can be relatively wealthy, but could maybe have some amount of wealth. But when it's all a matter of scale, and these houses are very important, the second, ninth, and 11th. Although the first and the fifth are also important, because if you remember, we had said first, fifth, and ninth are Lakshmi sthanas. Those are the Lakshmi houses. But second, ninth, and 11th are important. So just remember that when we look at the example chart. So again, I think it says the same. Yoga becomes more powerful when ruler of ninth house is involved with second and 11th. The trine houses are considered Lakshmi sthanas. Vishnu sthanas are the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th houses in the quadrants. So the trines are the Lakshmi sthanas, quadrants are the Vishnu sthanas. And so when Vishnu and Lakshmi come together in your chart, it forms a Raja Yoga. So when does that happen? When any of the quadrant combines with any of the trines. That forms a Raja Yoga. Now, obviously, again, it's a matter of scale, right? So if a person has one Raja Yoga, that's good. If a person has two Raja Yogas, that's extremely good. If a person has three Raja Yogas, then that's amazing. So again, it's a matter of relativity also. So same thing for all the yogas, same thing for Dana yogas too. So in this case, an example of a Raja Yoga is fourth and ninth together, or fifth and 10th together, and so on. Now, the third type I would just put over there, I said any two planets joining together forms a yoga. So the effect of the combination depends upon the strength and weakness of the planets. And then again, the same thing about, mixing colors together, the resulting color would be completely different. So for example, if Jupiter and Ketu, I just took these two planets together, and so what does that, when they come together in a chart, what does that represent? So that signifies that the person can receive a download of divine knowledge. Ketu is spirituality, Jupiter is knowledge, and Ketu, you can tap into different realms and so on. So the person receives a download of divine knowledge. It's almost like the wisdom is coming from another realm. They are drawn to enlightenment, and they can attain higher states of consciousness with meditation practices. Now, all this by Jupiter and Ketu coming together. Isn't that amazing? Now, I ask a question of you all on this. Is there anybody you know who you think might have this yoga in their chart? And again, I cannot see the chart, but just think about it. See if you think you may know, and some of you might know. Actually, I'm going to pull up the chart. Yes, you're absolutely right. It is Kaliji. Kaliji in her chart has this, and I've not spoken to Kaliji about this, and I don't know if she doesn't know this, but she knows it now. So Kaliji, you have this yoga in your chart, and you have it in your first house, which is who we are basically. Remember, we said the first house is the most important. So now you know how Kaliji knows, where is she getting all that information from, and how she knows that stuff. It is this download of divine knowledge coming from another realm. Okay, so the next one we go on to is the transits and the gochara, which is basically the planets are always in motion. Everything in the universe is in motion. The transits show where the planets are at any given point in time. So, and they have an effect on our lives. As these planets, they move through different houses, and we saw the houses. They create positive or challenging influences depending on the transits. And but the transits of slower moving planets like Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, and Ketu are especially important because Jupiter stays in a sign for 1 year and changes sign on an average once a year. Saturn stays in a sign for 2.5 years. Rahu and Ketu, they move together and they move backwards, and they are in a sign for a year, for 18 months or so. And when they go into different houses, they affect different areas of our life, either in a positive way or in a challenging way. But the good news is we can see what the transits are going to be now and in the future. So we can prepare for it mentally or whatever we can do to know that these are possibilities that might happen. Like, for example, as I was saying, when Jupiter goes into your 7th house, it creates opportunities for relationships and so on. Or a person can get married. If Saturn goes over a person's moon, and that is the Sarisati, basically, because Saturn stays in a sign for 2.5 years. So the Sarisati is 7.5 year cycle. So it represents the house previous to the moon, the house of the moon, and the house next to the moon. So 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, 7.5 years. It can create some major challenges in a person's life, but also it can bring some opportunities too. But basically, what's going to happen is, the person goes through an identity change. So they could either change their relationship status. If they're married, they may even go through a divorce, or if they're not married, they may go through a marriage or something, depending on other aspects, also on the dashas too. But during Saraswati, it is seen that they can change the place where they work, their profession, their career, because they reevaluate things from a different standpoint. They can even change where they live. So it is a period of growth, basically. So a person goes through a kind of a transformation. Now, the good news is it happens once every 28, 29 years, because that's how long it takes Saturn to come back to the same place in the zodiac. Because if you look at it, 2.5 years in each sign, there are 12 signs, so roughly about 30 years. So it takes that long for it to come back and for us to go through transformation. Now, what that doesn't necessarily mean that we all go through transformation at the age of 30, 60, and if we live to 90. No, because it all depends on where the moon is in our chart and where Saturn was when we were born, and then Saturn transits after. So for some people, it could happen at the age 5, and then 30 years later, and then 30 years later. For some people, it could happen at age 15, and 30 years later, and 30 years. So that all has been you see from your birth chart, when those periods happen. So that is on transits. Then Vimshotri Dasha. We talked about it being a powerful predictive technique that's unique to Vedic astrology. Dasha means state of being, and different planets influence a person's life during different times. This is the Dasha Lord. And as I said, we take on the characteristics or the qualities of that planet of whose Dasha we are going through. So think of it like if you go for a Broadway play or something, and just think of, like, there are 9 actors on the stage, and the spotlight is shining on a particular actor, and that actor is saying out their role, their part. So that actor comes forward and plays out their thing. So that is the Dasha Lord. That is that planet coming forward and playing its major role in our life. And then when that Dasha is over, another planet comes, another actor comes forward, and the spotlight shines on that. So then that planet takes its predominance over our lives, both from a quality standpoint, from an internal standpoint, and external standpoint also. So that's the way to kind of to think about dashas. So for example, during Sun Dasha, because the Sun is about independence, about self-esteem, about the person becomes independent and wants to do things their own way. During the Moon Dasha, the person becomes more emotional, more home-loving, may spend more time with women or their mother. During Mars Dasha, the person can take on the qualities of Mars, become more aggressive, more anger-prone, and more accident-prone also. So they have to be careful in their Mars Dasha. During Venus Dasha, it's about relationships, luxuries, comforts, and so on. Although relationships can happen in other dashas too, based on the chart. It's not only in Venus Dasha. But it takes on a higher importance, because, and it's not just relationships on the romantic. The person likes to spend more time with other people and in groups also, and kind of do fun things and creative things and so on. So as we see, we take on the qualities of the planet whose dasha that we are going through, and this is a very important part of Vedic astrology that I've seen. It's amazing how, I mean, I have so many examples that I will not be able to go through over here, but how people change when they go from one dasha to another. It's the same person. Like, one example I can give is there's a friend of mine who grew up in suburbs of Chicago in a middle class neighborhood, and she was in her Venus dasha. And 5 years ago, she moved into she completely changed, in the sense that she bought a motorcycle and she was out on her own, going from place to place on her own, and just going from place to. And in the scriptures, it is written actually that during the Sun Dasha, the person will be wandering around in the jungles and forests like things. And she actually, she doesn't know astrology. I mean, up until and at that time, she did not know. So she was actually taking her motorcycle and going and camping in forests and jungle, and forests basically, not jungles. And even a few weeks ago, I actually happened to talk to her, and she was in a campground in a forest in North Carolina. So, and that's because her sun dasha is still continuing on. Now, her sun dasha we will see is 6 years, and this started 5 years ago. Next year, she will start her moon dasha, and she will completely change in the sense that this will not interest her anymore. What will be important to her will be a home, maybe spending time with her mother, and maybe, creating a home or a family environment or something like that. And that's going to go on for the next 10 years. So wouldn't it be better for her or for anybody to know what's going to happen? What are the changes that I'm going to go through, and then be mentally and physically prepared for it? But there are significant changes that sometimes they happen on the exact day, sometimes a little bit earlier, sometimes a little bit later. But the changes are quite, I would say, fundamental in nature, even though it's the same person. So these are the dashas. The sun has been given 6 years, moon 10, Mars 7, Rahu 18, Jupiter 16, Saturn 19, Mercury 17, Ketu 7, Venus 20. Now I can already sense the question, why different years for different planets? Good question, no answer. This is what the rishis basically, with their infinite wisdom, came up with, and this is exactly what works. It works beautifully, and that's all we can look at is, how it works. It's amazing how things work, and not only at that cycle, but there are sub-cycles within that too. So each of the moon dasha, we will see it has its sub-cycle at the second level. It's called bhukti, and the third level is called pratyantar dasha. And then things start happening when even the sub-cycles change, and these things could be significant and major. Okay. So how is it true that everybody, the first 6 years are sun, next 10 years are moon, next 7 years are Mars? No, absolutely not. It all depends on the position of the moon in your birth chart. And the position of the moon in your birth chart all depends on the date and exact time that you were born, which goes back to the previous question of why is the exact time so important? The exact time is important is because it determines which not only which dasha, but which sub-dasha and which third level and fourth level. All these things are determined by the exact birth time. So if a person doesn't have the exact birth time, the predictions may not be entirely accurate as far as the timing goes, and even other things too. I mean, I've seen that the exact birth time is important. So if a person doesn't have exact birth time, it may be good to go to a rectification exercise and get it rectified first. So a person might be born in the Mars dasha, and it also could be different where in the Mars dasha, right? So it could be 3 years into the Mars dasha, it could be 6 years into the Mars dasha, where they would have only 1 year left, say if they're born 6 years into dasha, or it could be a few days left of that dasha. But once they complete that dasha, then they go into the next dasha, and then they do the whole dasha from there, and then the cycle goes on from there. The sequence is the same, but it'll be different for different people, in the sense that a person might be born into Rahu, and then they go into Jupiter, Saturn, then they will go into Mercury, Ketu, Venus, and Sun, and Moon, and so on. Or if a person could be born in Mercury, then they would go into Ketu next, Venus next, Sun next, Moon next, Mars next, and so on. Or they may be born in Venus, and then after Venus, they go into Sun, Moon, and so on. So that's the dasha system. And again, it goes through multiple, there are sub-cycles over there. Usually we just look at the dasha bhukti at the second level, and then there could be a third level also, pratyantar dasha. So in case, but the cycles, if it's a moon dasha, the sub-cycle of the next level will always start with moon, and then it goes through the same sequence: moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Ketu, Venus, Sun, and so on. If it was a Jupiter dasha, then the next sequence would start with Jupiter, Jupiter, and then Jupiter, 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 Saturn, Jupiter, Mercury, and so on. And then the last would be Jupiter, Rahu. So in this case, I just took an example, Saturn over here, which was, so this person would be in Moon, Saturn, and then within Moon, Saturn, they would go through these different cycles. So it just makes it more and more granular, so to speak. Okay, so that was the dashas. Now, if you're not already confused already, let's try some more here. Okay, this is not necessarily simple to understand, and don't worry if you don't understand it. Maybe but I'll try to see what we can do. But this is how we have looked at different things. We have looked at houses, we have looked at signs, we have looked at planets, and so on and so forth. How do we represent all this on a birth chart? So this is an actual representation, or two different representations of the birth chart. One, as I said, is practiced mostly in North India, which is the North Indian style. The other one is in practice in South India, which is the South Indian style. The information that's represented in both charts is exactly the same, although, as we can see, it looks completely different. And it's all a matter of personal preference. Some people gravitate more towards North Indian, some people gravitate more towards, they find South Indian much easier to. So it's all just a matter of personal preference. So there's no right or wrong here. So what's the difference between these two? So there are two major differences. In the North Indian, the houses are fixed. So every chart, this over here where my cursor is pointing is always the first house. Then we go to, this is always the second house. This is always the third, always the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th house. Notice these are the houses that are fixed. So we went counterclockwise. Okay. So houses are fixed and we went counterclockwise. And that's it. And in this case, in the South Indian, it is the signs that are fixed and we go clockwise. So this is always Aries. This is always Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces. So here the signs are fixed. Now you will say, how do we identify which house and which sign? Well, that's where you look at this. This is an indicator here, ascendant. So ascendant is the rising sign, is the first house. So from then on, you count the houses. This is the first house, second house, third house. So Pisces is the fourth house, Aries is the fifth house, and so on. In this case, in the North Indian system, there are numbers we see. We see number 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's the number of the sign of the zodiac. So 9 is Sagittarius. So this person has Sagittarius rising. This is Capricorn, the 10th. 10 is, even though it's the second house, but it is saying number 10 because that's Capricorn, the 10th sign of the zodiac, and so on. Okay. So this will take some time to get used to it. But I would say that if anybody is interested in studying astrology, this is one of the key decisions you would make, because this, whether to go with North Indian style or South Indian style, because that is going to stay with you almost forever, because it's hard to switch. I've seen people astrologers who have been doing it for 25 years, and when you give it to them in a different style that they're used to, they're almost as lost as anybody. And they have to count and this and that, and they're so used to one way or the other. Again, so it's just a matter of personal preference. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so let's finish this. So the first house here is Aries. First house, this is always the first house, and this is always Aries in South Indian. And in this case, the houses are fixed, we go counterclockwise. In this case, the signs are fixed and we go clockwise. And the planets are the same. So here we see Mars is in Aries, and we'll have to count. This is first, second, third, fourth, fifth. So we see Mars is in Aries in the fifth house. So over here, we know this is always the fifth house. So we see Mars is over here in Aries, because one is Aries, so it's Mars is over here. So it's just a different way of looking at it. Now, what do these parentheses mean? Basically, we see Mars and Saturn have parentheses around. So that means the planet is retrograde. Retrograde means from the position of the Earth, it's like the planet is moving backwards. It's actually, the planet is not moving backwards. It's just that the speed of rotation around the sun has changed, because sometimes some planets move faster, sometimes they move slower. In this case, it has moved slower. So compared to the Earth, as the Earth has a vantage point, we feel, oh, the planet is moving backwards. So, And that has its own implications in astrology. I mean, that is one of the key things as to what effects do retrograde planets have, and in our charts, and they do, even in transits and even in our birth chart. So they tend to retrograde planets can they make us revisit those things that are indicated by the planet. There could be some delays in it, but as a general rule, and this is my own perspective, what I have seen, and you may not find this anywhere, but what I've seen is, as a general rule, retrograde malefic planets, they tend to be less malefic in nature. At the same time, retrograde benefic planets tend to be less benefic in nature. So it's almost like they lose some of their power in that sense. But they have some other things that are important, because we tend to focus more on those areas of our life, because there are delays or things that are happening. So those things can get stronger over time. Okay, so here we saw all these building blocks. We saw the signs, we saw the houses, we saw the planets. We looked at the two chart representations, North Indian, South Indian. We looked at the yogas, the planetary yogas. We looked at the Dana yogas, the Raja yogas, and other yogas forming. We looked at the Gochara, or the transits, and we looked at the dashas. So now we will pull it all together in some examples. And before that, let's see if there are any questions. I would guess, I mean, obviously it's a guess on it's that, it evolved over time. It first started off, and there are other rishis also. It was not just one rishi. There were other rishis at different times. They added to the knowledge. So yes, the answer is it evolved over time. And, it might still continue to evolve. Who knows? I mean, it's up to us also. If a person is interested, can take it and take it further. Good question. I mean, I just put those Western names there just to make it easier for us, but actually they have different names in Vedic astrology. So for Aries, it's Meshra, and then for Taurus, it's Rishabh. For Gemini, it's Mithun. For Cancer, it's Kark. For Leo, it's Simharashi, and so on. And then Kanya, and then Libra is Tula. Scorpio is Vrishchik. Sagittarius is Dhanu Rashi. Capricorn is Makar, Aquarius is Kumbh Rashi, and Pisces is Meen Rashi. So those are the Sanskrit names. So that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, that's a different, that's a mundane astrology, which is kind of different. But the short answer is yes. And as far as what's coming now is, just briefly, because not to get too political, because no matter what I say, half people might be happy and it may not make the other half people happy. But what I would say is that Saturn has moved into Capricorn. So Capricorn, as we saw, was its own sign. So Capricorn and Aquarius. So, and that, as we said, was, every 30 years it comes. So what does that mean? So Saturn is a planet of, of the common person. It's not much of the elite and so on. So what's going to happen over the next few years is, and starting about now, is that the power is going to return to the common person, and it's going to be more democratic in that sense. And not only that, there may be some, and this is just my own prediction, or so take it what it's worth, or prediction, or guess on my part, is there will be in the next few years some social programs, some large-scale social programs that are put into place. And why is that? Because when we go back, and I actually went back and looked 30 years ago what happened, 60 years ago what happened, 90 years ago what happened. So I went last 3 times. So 90 years ago, I think it was in 1933 or so, is when Social Security was enacted, a large-scale social program. 30 years later, 1960s or so, in the middle of 1960s, is when Medicare was enacted. Again, a large-scale social program for the so-called underprivileged. I mean, it was, Social Security was for the older people, and Medicare was also for all this thing. But Saturn is again about older people, but it's also about the common person. And 30 years ago, what happened was not only there was Clinton getting into office, there were 8 years of democratic rule and so on, but also the internet came about, which actually created a level playing field. What it did was it allowed anybody, and actually pretty much anybody, even students, they could create a large multinational company just from their own bedroom. For example, Facebook was created by Mark Zuckerberg during that time, but because of the internet, by just one person. And now today it's a global multinational company with more than 1 billion users. eBay and so on and so forth. So many companies that came about, which did not require large scale resources and so on. It could be just a person having an idea and from their own room creating something that basically can change the world. So that was the kind of changes that happen. It creates a level playing field. And now we are in that same phase starting about now. So you can draw your own conclusions about what's going to happen with the US presidential election and what's going to happen on the Senate side and whether it's going to flip or not. So I think you can read between the lines but that's my sense. As I said, in Vedic, we don't use the outer planets. And we also don't use squares and all that stuff. So there are different aspects in Vedic. There are some special aspects that I did not mention. Was like Jupiter has special aspects on the first, fifth, and ninth house from itself. Mars has aspect of first, fourth, and eighth, and Saturn has first, third, and 10th, and they are all equal 100% aspects. And all planets aspect the seventh house from each other. So those are the aspects we look at in Vedic. We don't have squares and all that stuff. One is I want to look at the chart of Jeff Bezos, who we all know is the founder and the richest person on the planet, to see how his chart explains that. And then next, I just looked at, I don't know why I just took this chart, but for no reason, but I just took this chart for MS Dhoni, India cricket team captain, cricket is huge in India. Cricket, Bollywood, and Indians like their food. So these three things are key. And MS Dhoni was the cricket team captain that brought the World Cup to India. So he was put on a pedestal and almost worshipped like a god by more than 1 billion people. And so I wanted to see why in his chart what reflected that too. Okay, it's going to be interesting, and let's take a look then. So this is the chart of Jeff Bezos. He was born on January 12th, 1964 at 11:33 a.m. in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I have the North Indian at the top, South Indian at the bottom for people who are already familiar with one or the other. And what we see is Jupiter is in his first house of Pisces. The second house is Aries. Third house, no planets there. Third house, and I might switch to the Sanskrit terms, and given that question, so maybe just so that you get a flavor of the Sanskrit terms too. So the third house is, well, I'll do both maybe. Third house is Rishabh or Taurus. Fourth house is Gemini or Mithun, and Rahu is there. Fifth house is Cancer or Kark. No planets there. Sixth house is Leo or Sim. No planets there too. The seventh house is Mercury. It's Virgo or Kanya. It is ruled by Mercury. The eighth house is Libra or Tula. No planets there too. The ninth house is Scorpio or Vrishchik. No planets there. The 10th house is Sagittarius or Dhanu, ruled by Jupiter. And it has 4 planets there: Moon, retrograde Mercury, Ketu, and Sun. The 11th house is Capricorn. Mars and Saturn are there. The 12th house is Aquarius, and Venus is there. So now, obviously, he's the richest person on the planet. So what kind of a Dana Yoga he has? So the first thing that we can look at, Mars and Saturn are together in the 11th house. So ruler of second house and Mars 11th. So the second house is Aries. It's ruled by Mars, which has gone in the 11th house. The 11th house is Capricorn, is ruled by Saturn, which is 11th house. So we are seeing the second and the 11th coming together in the 11th house. In addition, remember we said 9th house is house of good luck. So the 9th house ruler is also Mars, which is Scorpio. So it's ruled by Mars. So the second, 11th, and 9th house have all come together. It's creating a really powerful power, and add to in the 11th house itself. See, the 11th house is house of gains. Anything that goes there gets a kind of a multiplier effect. So we have this powerful Dana Yoga of all the three main Dana houses, because second house represents wealth, 11th house represents gain, 9th house represents fortune, right? They're all coming together, and it's all and coming together in the 11th house, which is a massive, massive Dana Yoga, which explains why he is the richest person on the planet. Now, one may think that the question that comes to mind is, did he become rich because he created Amazon? Or was he meant to be rich and Amazon basically was a means to fulfill his destiny? Now, I happen to think that it's the latter. I happen to think that basically that decision that he's going to be the richest person was made not when Amazon went public or when he created Amazon and so on. It was made at the moment that he was born. And this is all now fulfillment of his destiny. Now, why Amazon? That also, I was just looking at this one. See, we see the 10th house is the house of career and profession. Look at the planets in the 10th house. Sun is the leader. When Sun goes into the 10th house, that person is the CEO of the company. He's a big leadership position, because Sun is all about being a leader in the profession. Look at Ketu. Ketu is the planet that signifies computers. Mercury is the planet of commerce, business, transactions. And Moon is the planet of home and food and all. So isn't it interesting, or is it just a coincidence that he happens to create Amazon, which is an online business transactions basically happening, an online marketplace? And not only that, Amazon is, when it comes to Moon, is basically when you buy something from your home or for your kitchen or whatever, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? I would think it might be Amazon. That's not 100%, but that's typically what happens, at least in the US. So that's how the planets in his chart are representing that he would be creating a business with all these huge commerce and making a lot of money because the Dana Yogas get activated here because of his business. Isn't that interesting? In that it's there in his chart. Now, bringing the dashas together, let's bring the concept of dasha. I was actually looking at his dashas. His Sun dasha started in 1988. And then I was looking at Wikipedia. That's when he started working, okay, at another company, at different companies. And he was getting promoted to the head of department and so on and so forth. And he was at the top of his department and he changed jobs. And again, he was getting promoted. So the 6 years, he was in a leadership position wherever he was going. Then the Moon Dasha came, and it was exactly in 1994, his Moon Dasha started, and it could be even the same month that the Moon Dasha started. He decided, out of the blue, to start Amazon. And this was, I believe, it said that he was actually driving cross country from New York to Seattle. And on the way, in his car trip, he put the business plan together. He actually had a good job on Wall Street that he was working with. But see, when the dashas change, things change. And our perspective shifts, our thinking shifts, everything shifts. And Moon being in the 10th house of career and profession, he decided he wants to start his own business. Okay. Then it was in 1994. Then within that, Moon is in 10 years, right? And then we talked about, and I'm just trying to incorporate all the concepts that we discussed. We talked about subcycles. We talked about Rahu Ketu being with the Moon. And I mentioned that it's not easy. Well, in his case, he has Moon and Ketu together amongst other planets, and he has Sun Ketu together too. So not necessarily easy from an emotional standpoint, because it can affect the emotional life. But when he came into the dasha of Moon and Ketu, which was in the year 2000 to 2003, Amazon almost went bankrupt, if you can believe it or not. And you can check it for yourself on this thing. It went bankrupt. So imagine the amount of stress he had to go through, that he pursued this thing and it was going bankrupt. But then once Moon Ketu got over, things changed again. Things started moving in his favor. And then he came into the Mars Dasha. He survived that thing. He was able to pull it together. Mars gives you that aggression and that energy and that enthusiasm and that courage. And he said, like, we are moving forward no matter what. And And not only that, Mars also activates his Dana Yoga. It forms the Dana Yoga. So Amazon turned around. He started doing well. And those years he continued to do well. Amazon continued to grow. Then he came into the Rahu Dasha. I believe the Rahu Dasha was in 2011. And we talked about how Rahu is the planet of Maya. It pulls you towards illusion and so on, and gives you unimaginable fame and wealth and so on. Well, after 2011 is when Amazon was declared as the biggest online store in the whole world. And it was in 2013, 2014, he was declared as the richest person on the planet. So see how the dashas play out. Now, I don't know if Jeff Bezos has looked at his chart, but if he has, then he would know that once his Rahu Dasha gets over in 2029, he's going to go through a change. He will enter the Jupiter Dasha. The Jupiter is in the Lagna, and Jupiter is almost like a preacher, or likes to give advice, likes to give this thing. It's a planet for spirituality, for wisdom. He is going to change from being this very demanding, win at all costs and take no prisoners thing and all that stuff, which is what is represented by Rahu. And he's going to change where Jupiter is about helping other people. He will probably create some kind of a charitable foundation, just like Bill Gates has, and use his money for charity purposes, or he might, even be in an advisory role to others and so on. But he will step back from, and it's possible he's going to step back from his leadership position at Amazon and hand it over to somebody else. So I don't know if he has had a Vedic reading, but if he was there with me, this is what I would let him know, and so that this way he could prepare for the changes that are going to come and maybe put transition plans in place in Amazon or but it's still a ways. We are in 2020 now, and this is going to happen around 2029, and there are lots of other things that would happen before then. Now, that was the concept of dashas. We also discussed transits. Okay, so let's see how transits are playing out in this thing. I'm just trying to illustrate an example to drive home the point. So last 2 years, Saturn has been going through Sagittarius. Okay, and Sagittarius is his 10th house. It has all these 4 planets, and Saturn is going over his moon. If you remember, I said Saturn going over the moon is when a person revisits and relooks at goes through a sarisati and revisits their things in their personal life as well as maybe in their professional life. But in his case, Saturn was going over Mercury also, and Mercury happens to rule his 7th house of marriage. So Saturn going over his 7th house, because Saturn is aspecting the 10th house, the 7th house through its 10th aspect. And I know this is getting complicated, and a lot of you may not understand, but if you go back and look at the videos, basically, and over time, these concepts will become a little bit clearer also. But Saturn aspects the 3rd and the 10th house from itself. So Saturn is aspecting the 12th house, and 12th house represents loss. Saturn is aspecting the 4th house, and Saturn is aspecting the 7th house. So this is the time, the last 2 years, is when he actually went through a divorce, if you look at his life, right? Because Saturn was going over his 7th lord, and it was going over his moon. And that divorce resulted in him giving half of his, or whatever, big portion of his billions of dollars to his wife. And that was the loss that was coming into play also. He was meant to go through a loss at that time. He was meant to go through this thing at that time. So, but interestingly enough, Jupiter is also, it was in Sagittarius at the same time. And if you remember, Jupiter is the planet of good luck and so on. And Jupiter was also going through over his 7th lord, Mercury. So that's the reason he already started he was already in another relationship when he was going through a divorce. It was the effects of Jupiter also, as well as the Saturn. I know I mentioned a lot of things over here, but that should give you some flavor as to how to look at the chart and how to pull together the transits, the houses, the signs, the planets, and the gochara. And also, by the way, he has a Raja Yoga too. He has the 4th lord, and 4th lord is Mercury, with the 5th lord, which is Moon. Mercury and Moon are together. Remember we said, so that the trine and the quadrant are coming together. And they're coming together in his 10th house of career and profession. So does he have fame, authority, and status in his profession? Yes, exactly. it is because of his profession he's known and his money. Well, it was because of his profession that he made that money, and that's how he's known. So he has that thing playing out also. It makes him a king-like figure in his profession. Okay, that was Jeff Bezos. Let's look at Mahinder Singh Dhoni and look at his chart. So over here we see he's got Jupiter, Moon, and Saturn in the first house in Virgo. He has Ketu in the fifth house, Mars in the ninth, Mercury and Sun. Again, we see Sun going in the 10th house, means the person is going to get to the top of their profession. And that's why he was the captain of the Indian cricket team, which is it's like a big status thing, especially in India. And he has Venus and Rahu together. And for him to bring back the World Cup. And interestingly enough, so let's see what he has. So he has the fourth and the fifth house together again. So this is Jupiter, ruler of the fourth house, Sagittarius is Jupiter, and combined with Saturn together in the first house. So the Raja Yoga is forming in the first house. First house is not because of his career or because of this, it's because of who he is. I mean, it was all because of his self-effort. If you look at his story, he actually grew up in a very mediocre middle-class family. In fact, he had a job of a ticket collector on Indian Railways. Now imagine that. When you go on a train in Indian Railways, it's like, the ticket collector comes to check the ticket. That's what he was doing. But because of his own self-efforts, where he would practice 10 to 12 hours a day cricket, and once he gets off his job, he would go and practice again till midnight or so every day. He became at the top of it was because of his own efforts, he was able to be so good in his game that he got all this fame and so on. So Raja Yoga is in the first house. Now he also has Dana Yoga too. Okay, so the 11th Lord and 11th Lord is combining with the 5th Lord. So the 11th Lord is Moon, and the 5th Lord is Saturn. So 11th and 5th. So it's not necessary just the second, as I said, 2nd, 11th, and 9th has to be there. This is a different form of Dana Yoga, but this explains why he has hundreds of millions of dollars, while Jeff Bezos has hundreds of billions of dollars. So they both are rich. They both have Dana Yogas, but it's just a matter of scale. In Jeff Bezos' case, it's like all the perfect things are lining up as far as money concerned. Okay, so those were the slides. If anybody is interested in consulting, Kali asked me to put this information together. So this is my website, astrovedic108.com. Those are some screenshots of my website. You can go there and schedule a reading if you want, and there's a calendar there. You can pick the date and time, and we can have a reading over Zoom. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. In fact, I talk to people from India also and different places, Germany and so on. So they consult with me. But so during the consultations, we can go with doesn't matter. It's up to you. But typically we can go with the personality traits as indicated by the chart, like what are some of the strengths and so on of a person. What is the karmic blueprint, the timeline? What are the different dashas, the sequence, and what's for the past, present, and future. So that this way you're better prepared for any changes that will be coming. It's not a matter of if, but it is just a matter of when. And then any particular things that want to be focused on, whether it's relationship, whether it's career, money, or other questions. Now, what we need for the birth chart is those three things. We need the date of birth, hopefully the exact time of birth, and the place of birth, and that's sufficient to do the chart. Okay, so that was it. Any questions? And that's my last slide here. No, because it all changes. It changes. They'll have similar charts, but they will not have exactly the same charts. Even twins do not have exactly the same chart, because the Lagna degree, it changes every few minutes, and that also changes. And the divisional charts, we did not talk about that, but there are some things called divisional charts, which are like more of a granular look at a particular area of life. Those charts are calculated on different principles and so on. And those divisional charts can be quite different, even if they point to close to each other. The dashas will be similar, but it'll be different. And sometimes a person may be born just a few minutes away and they can have completely different charts. Why? Like if in the first house, there's something called the rising sign, the rising degree, right? So even if, say, Leo is your first house, but there's a rising degree, what degree of Leo was rising? Was it 5 degrees? Was it 10 degrees, 15 degrees? And the degree changes every 4 minutes. Okay. So if a person is born at 29 degrees of Leo and another person is born 5 minutes later, they will have completely different charts because the first house has changed from Leo to Virgo now. So the whole area, all the different, the planets are in different signs. The planets will be in the same sign, but they'll be in different houses, and they will affect different areas of a person's life. So the answer, short answer is the charts can be similar, but they will not be the same. Whether Mercury being retrograde represents anything in the chart. So when Mercury is retrograde, remember I said the person has to go back and revisit things and so on. But it also, what happens is they are able to understand concepts that other people don't, and vice versa also, that sometimes other people get the concept, but the person may or may not get it. But they are able to get concepts that other people, and that's the reason he came up with this whole creative. There was no online commerce before. He was able to come up with this thinking outside the box, so to speak, and come up with a creative idea for that. Few things. It's all about karma. You know, when people talk about karma and sorry, free will versus destiny, I mean, one way to look at it, whether it's one or the other, it's actually both. It's like they're two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. Well, that is one. And what is karma? Karma is exercising our free will to do some actions for which we will have the fruit of, whether it could be good or bad. And that's destiny. The fruit playing itself out is destiny. But we are exercising our free will to do our karma. So now the second point was for him to amass this wealth and spirituality and so on. See, that's the thing is, it is not for us to judge. This is the birth chart playing itself out. That soul decided that this was its path for whatever reason, and that path was the best path for it. Who are we to judge that soul's path? That is one thing. And the third thing is when he say all about amassing wealth and not, that's because, and Jeff, you're correct, absolutely. It does look like that, but don't forget that he's in the Rahu phase. And Rahu is about amassing wealth, about obsessions, about desires. It's never enough, no matter how much it is. He still gets up and goes and does all kinds of. And Rahu is also a planet that is not fair in its dealings, okay? Because it can be very crafty, because it's all about getting what I want. That's how that Rahu had to go into that and stand in that line and get that Amrita, because it's all and had to disguise themselves. So sometimes they can present themselves as something else. But having said all that stuff, and some of Amazon's practices are questionable, and that's his Rahu playing out. But once he comes into the Jupiter dasha, I can almost tell you that from my standpoint, I could be wrong, but I think you're going to see a fundamental shift in Bezos, and he will be focused less on doing all those things, on winning at any cost and amassing wealth, and he will be focused more on his wisdom, on getting knowledge, and maybe doing some of the charitable stuff, creating a charitable foundation and so on. So you will see a big difference because he will take on the characteristics and flavor of Jupiter. And right now he is taking on the characteristics and flavor of Rahu, which are completely opposite than each other. Rahu is like a demon and Jupiter is a god. Again, no judgment there, but that's what you're seeing at play. So it's just a matter of time. If you're waiting for him to do some charitable stuff, yeah, you probably have to wait about 10 years or so, and then you will see that. I mean, these calculations about Kali Yuga and all, everybody has different and I don't exactly know the answers to when Kali Yuga exactly started, although there are different ways of looking. But it almost seems like the way the rishis were able to tap into this deep cosmic knowledge just by their own meditation, it almost seems like a different time. It almost seems like it doesn't seem like it was like a Kali Yuga to me. Now, from a mathematical standpoint and from all the standpoint, maybe it was Kali Yuga, and I'm not disputing that. But from the way they were able to, and not only that, able to convey this knowledge in just verbal conversations. And what we are getting is, just a fraction of what has been left over, I think. And even that is a huge amount where it's hard for us to fathom, just that fraction. But for them to be able to, get this knowledge in their meditation, to be able to convey their knowledge in verbal conversations through a question and answers, and for them, their disciples to convey it, and it almost seems like a different time. It doesn't seem like we were completely in Kali Yuga then. So those are just my thoughts. Again, you may find some different perspective on that. I'm just sharing with you my perspective. So the answer is both. It goes both ways. Our birth chart foretells our destiny. And our destiny, as I said, through the rectification process, we can go backwards and look at the birth chart. So it's not all about destiny also, because if it was all destiny, and if everything was scripted out, then it's not like we are puppets in this creation. We are not, because then there would be no point of this creation. We are just coming out and acting out roles that are already scripted out. No, but there is destiny too. And if there was no destiny, a person and astrology wouldn't work. It wouldn't be able to tell you, okay, Jeff Bezos is going to go through this changes in this year, or in your chart too, or in some other chart. Astrology, because that's where destiny is playing out itself out. So there is both. There's destiny and there is free will, where we do some certain things based on our free will. Some things work out, some things don't, and that's how we grow. And then that also gives some purpose to creation. An easy way of thinking about this, and this is my own thing, and take it for what it's worth, is how do we identify what's destiny and what's free will? And that's not easy, first of all, but some things are destined no matter what. But as a layman, what we can think of is whatever is happening to us on the outside is destiny. How we are responding to it from the inside and how we are responding to it is our free will. And our free will is shaping our destiny. It's like two sides of the same coin. Okay, so destiny doesn't happen randomly. It happens because we did certain actions, could be good or bad, based on our free will. And we are continuing, as long as we are on this planet, we are continuing with those actions, and we're continuing to do karma and so on. And that karma will have a destiny. Okay? So it's a combination of both karma and destiny. And the destiny is reflected in the birth chart, but that's why no astrologer would be able to tell you 100% that this is exactly what's going to happen. Why? Because there's a concept of your free will. 5 years from now, yes, they can tell you what dasha you are, what this and that, but they cannot tell each and every event that happens in a person's life, because that will negate this concept of free will. And free will is definitely there. The answer is absolutely yes. And those are the good remedies, because what we are doing with this prayers and this and that is, well, two things. One is, we are asking for divine guidance, divine help. But at the same time, we are creating some good karma with our good actions. Now, good actions could also be helping somebody selflessly, somebody else who's in need. So that is also karma, which will have its own effects. Karma is not necessarily all negative. Karma is just the fruit of actions, basically. That's it. So if we do good actions, yes, we have some baggage of some negative karma. We all do. But we do good actions. We are adding it on the other side of the ledger. We are adding some good karma on this, and that could help us cushion the effects of the negative effects of the challenging karma. So yes, that is one thing. But the second thing I can share from my own experience is actually we feel like in our life that we are all by ourselves and that we don't have any help available when we go through challenging times. But actually, there is help available to us from our and I'm giving you my own perspective. This is not astrology or anything, but we have available to us through our angels, or what do you want to call it? Through some cosmic forces are there, and all we have to do is to ask for help. Because, and the reason why then, and somebody told me, oh, why don't they know that I'm going through this difficult time? Yes, they know. But the thing is, they do not want to interfere with your free will. But if you were to ask for help from your own guides or your own this thing, it doesn't have to be any particular god or anything like that, from your own this thing, the name and the forms are not important. You will see that you will get help. And I'm telling you from my own experience, and I would just put it out as a challenge for you to try it on your own. Just have a sincere request if you make to your whoever you consider as your divine guides, and then see how things unfold. So that will also help you cushion the effects of the negative karma.
Thank you so much, Umesh. It was superb.
Yes. I want to thank you, Kalaji, for again inviting me, and thank everybody else who took this time. It shows your interest, and that's commendable, and I appreciate that too. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.
Japa kusuma samkasham kasyapeyam mahadyutim. Japa kusuma samkasham kasyapeyam mahadyutim. Tamoghnam sarva papaghnam pranatosmi divakaram. Tamoghnam sarva papaghnam pranatosmi divakaram. Pranatosmi divakaram.
Pranatosmi divakaram.
Suryaya namaha.
Suryaya namaha.
Dadhi shankhatusharabham. Dadhi shankhatusharabham. Shirarnavasu sannibham. Shirarnavasu sannibham. Namami shashinam somam. Namami shashinam somam. Shambhormakutabhushanam. Shambhormakutabhushanam. Namami shashinam somam.
Namami shashinam somam.
Chandraya namaha.